accommodate what I suspected would be a larger than usual crowd. The clubhouse was a modest building at the center of the development, featuring a main meeting room, a small kitchen, and a
there we go.
It had been built by the original developer as a selling point for potential buyers, though it rarely saw much use beyond the monthly HOA meetings and the occasional
I fixed it.
Tonight, nearly every seat was filled. I arrived a few minutes before the 7 o'clock start time and took a seat near the back. The room buzzed with conversation as neighbors who rarely spoke to each other huddled in small groups, whispering and gesturing. I recognized most of the faces from years of casual waves and brief conversations over garden fences, but tonight everyone seemed to be looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and concern.
Survive 99 days. Find the missing children with well help. So the goal is to try and survive.
The other board members, Vice President Rick Coleman and Treasurer Sandra Liu,
Let's
flanked
do
her
a
like
couple
uncomfortable
rabbit.
bodyguards. Rick was a retired insurance adjuster who'd moved to the neighborhood
Grab
about 5 years ago,
that.
while Sandra worked as an accountant downtown and had volunteered for the treasurer position, mainly because nobody else wanted to deal with the finances. At exactly 7 o'clock, Margaret called the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's emergency session. As you may have heard, we've received some concerning correspondence that affects the entire community. A murmur ran through the room. I noticed several people
That's one thing
glancing in my
down.
direction. Before we discuss the main issue, Margaret continued, I want to address some rumors that have been circulating. It's important that we all have accurate information before making any decisions. She held up Tom's letter, its legal letterhead clearly visible even from the back of the room. Earlier this week, the HOA received a letter from an attorney representing Jesse Carter. She gestured toward me, and now everyone was definitely staring. The letter makes certain claims about property ownership that, if true, could significantly impact our community. Frank Martinez, my elderly neighbor, raised his hand. Margaret, can you just tell us what the letter says? Is making everyone nervous? Margaret's jaw tightened, but she nodded. The letter claims that Mr. Carter owns the road infrastructure throughout Willowbrook Estates, including all streets, drainage systems, and utility access points. It alleges that we have been using his property without permission and demands payment for retroactive usage fees. End quote. The room erupted in concerned voices. Someone shouted, how is that possible? While another person demanded, is this some kind of scam? Margaret held up her hand for silence. I want to assure everyone that the board is taking this matter very seriously. We've contacted our attorney and are investigating these claims.
Gasoline.
I stood up, and the room gradually quieted. If I may, Margaret, I'd be happy to answer any questions folks might have. Her face flushed, but she couldn't very well refuse without looking petty. Mr. Carter, the floor is yours. I moved to the front of the room, feeling like I was about to make an important presentation. Thank you. I know this situation is confusing and probably a little scary for everyone.
Good flashlight real
Nobody
quick
likes
as well.
uncertainty, especially when it involves their home and property values.
First, get a wolf.
I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many neighbors as I could. The facts are pretty straightforward, even if the legal situation is complicated. Back in 2008, my construction company built all the roads in this development. When the original developer went bankrupt, I ended up owning the roads through a mechanics lien to recover unpaid construction costs. Mrs. Henderson, who lived on Maple Ridge Drive, raised her hand. Why didn't anyone know about this before now? Honestly, because it never mattered before. You folks have been maintaining the roads beautifully. Everyone's been getting along fine. And I saw no reason to complicate things. I was content with the informal arrangement.
I'll check that out in a sec.
So what changed? Asked Rick Coleman from his seat at the head table. I looked directly at Margaret. What changed was when someone decided to threaten to tow my tractor from my own driveway for violating community standards. That's when informal arrangements become formal property disputes. The room buzzed with whispered
6 more pieces
conversations.
of wood.
Margaret's face was turning
Or
progressively red,
nose.
but she remained silent. The treasurer looked up from a calculator where she'd apparently been running numbers. Mr. Carter, The letter mentions usage fees of over $400,000. Is that accurate? According to my attorney's research, that's the fair market rate for private road usage in this area, calculated over the 15 years since the HOA was established. I paused, letting that number sink in. But let me be clear about something. I didn't write that letter to bankrupt anyone or destroy this community. I wrote it because I was being harassed for parking my own equipment on my own property. And sometimes you have to speak in language that people understand. Frank Martinez spoke up again. Jesse, what is it you actually want here? Cut through all the legal talk and tell us what you're after. I appreciated Frank's directness. What I want is to be left alone to use my property as I see fit, within reasonable limits. I want to help my neighbors when they need it, like hauling storm debris, without someone threatening to tow my equipment. And I want mutual respect instead of harassment. And the usage fees? Sandra pressed. The usage fees are a legal reality based on property ownership. Whether and how we address them depends on how reasonable everyone wants to be going forward. And
Is there another trust I can go for?
I've been happy with our informal arrangements for 15 years. I'd be happy to continue. Margaret finally found her voice. What kind of modifications? An acknowledgement that I own the roads, for starters. A formal agreement that protects everyone's interests, establishes reasonable guidelines for road usage and maintenance.
Oh, chest, I can use that.
Harassment over Ron. Property rights issues. And in exchange? Margaret's voice was tight, with barely controlled
Or
anger.
just trash to grind up later.
In exchange, I'd be willing to waive the retroactive usage fees and continue allowing unrestricted access to all current residents. Think of it as a mutual easement agreement. You get guaranteed road access. I get recognition of my property rights. The room was quiet for a long moment as people processed this information. Finally, Sandra Lou spoke up. That sounds reasonable, Mr. Carter. What would prevent you from changing your mind later and demanding payment or restricting access? A formal legal agreement recorded with the county that binds me in any ask. Future owners of the road property. Tom Brennan, my attorney, has already drafted a preliminary version that protects everyone's interests while clarifying the ownership situation. I pulled out a copy of Tom's proposed easement agreement and handed it to Sandra. The key points are guaranteed access for all current and future residents, shared maintenance responsibilities, and protection against arbitrary access restrictions.
Let's head back. I got all the materials I needed so far. Let's first, there's a wolf. Dead. No. That's not what I want.
Can I get a 40 on 5?
Fill up with a 69-cent large big gulp at Speedway.
In exchange, the HOA acknowledges my ownership and agrees to respect my property rights. Margaret snatched the document from Sandra and scanned it quickly. This still leaves you in control of the roads. Because I own them, I said simply. But the agreement limits my control.
Somewhere deep in the forest.
I can't arbitrarily block access or charge excessive fees. Think of it like any other easement agreement, except instead of running across someone's backyard, it involves roads. Rick Coleman leaned forward. What about maintenance costs? We've been paying to maintain these roads for years. The agreement addresses that too. Going forward, maintenance would be a shared responsibility based on usage. Since residents use the roads every day, and I use them occasionally, the cost sharing reflects that reality. I'd contribute about 10%, the HOA would cover the rest, same as you've been doing. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand again. What happens if we don't agree to this? I'd been hoping someone would ask that question. Then we continue with the formal legal process. My attorney files a lawsuit for trespassing and unauthorized use of private property. The HOA hires lawyers to fight the claim. We spend months or years in court, running up legal fees that will probably cost more than the usage fees themselves. I let that sink in before continuing. Meanwhile, since there's no formal agreement allowing you to use the roads, I feel within my rights to restrict access while the legal dispute is ongoing. Not saying I would, but legally, I could. The implications of that statement rippled through the room. Without road access, the houses would be effectively landlocked, property values would plummet, and residents might not even be able to get essential services like mail delivery or emergency response. Sandra was scribbling numbers on her calculator again. From a financial standpoint, Mr. Carter's proposal seems like the best option available. Fighting this in court could easily cost us $50,000 or more in legal fees, with no guarantee of a favorable outcome. Margaret was reading through the easement agreement, her expression growing more frustrated with each page. This gives you veto power over any major road improvements or modifications. Only unreasonable modifications, I corrected. The agreement defines reasonable improvements as anything necessary for safety, drainage, or normal maintenance. I can't veto pothole repairs or storm damage fixes. But if you want to install speed bumps or change the road layout, we'd need to discuss it first. That's still control, Margaret insisted. It's ownership, I replied. And it's a lot more control than you'd have if we end up in court. Brent Martinez stood up, his arthritis making the movement slow and careful. I've lived in this neighborhood longer than almost anyone here, and I've known Jesse since he moved in 6 years ago. He's a good neighbor who minds his own business and helps people when they need it. This whole mess started because someone decided to throw their weight around over a tractor that
Oh, I didn't mean to find that one.
He looked directly
Interesting.
at Margaret. Jesse's been more than fair in his proposal. We acknowledge he owns the roads, we get guaranteed access and protection from future disputes, and we avoid a legal battle that could cost us a fortune. Seems like a no-brainer to me. Several other residents nodded in agreement. Margaret looked around the room, clearly realizing that public opinion required proper discussion and a formal vote by the board. Actually, Sandra Lou said, consulting a thick binder, according to local laws, any expenditure or legal commitment over $25,000 requires approval by a majority of all homeowners. Not just the board. Given the potential costs involved in fighting Mr. Carter's claim, this definitely qualifies. Margaret looked like she wanted to, but she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Fine. All those in favor of accepting Mr. Carter's easement proposal, raise your hands. Hands went up throughout the room. I counted at least 35 out of the 40-plus residents present. Even Rick Coleman raised his hand, though he looked uncomfortable about it. Those opposed? Those opposed? Margaret's hand shot up, along with 2 or 3 others near the front of the room. The motion passes, Sandra announced. Mr. Carter, when can we expect the formal agreement to be ready for signatures? My attorney can have the final version ready within a week, assuming everyone's comfortable with the terms we've discussed tonight. Margaret slammed her gavel down harder than necessary. Meeting adjourned. As people filed out of the clubhouse, several neighbors stopped to shake my hand or offer thanks for handling the situation reasonably. Mrs. Henderson apologized for Margaret's behavior, while Frank clapped me on the shoulder and invited me over for coffee to discuss his ongoing battle with the oak tree cleanup. Margaret was packing up her papers with sharp, angry movements. As I walked past her table, she looked up and fixed me with a cold stare.
Perfect, that's what I wanted.
I think it is, Margaret. That's your choice. Just remember that every day and potential liability. I left her there, surrounded by her charts and schedules and the wreckage of her authority, and walked home down the road. Ready within 5 days, just as promised. The document was a thing of beauty. Precisely crafted that protected everyone's rights, establishing clear boundaries and responsibilities. It guaranteed perpetual road access for all current and bride. Future residents, established fair cost sharing for maintenance and improvements, and created a dispute resolution process for any future disagreements. Most importantly, it included a clause that prevented any party from unilaterally modifying the agreement without consent from both the property owner and a majority of the homeowners. Margaret couldn't single-handedly convert the Zephyr agreement, and I couldn't arbitrarily change the terms or restrict access. The signing ceremony took place at Tom's office on Thursday afternoon. Sandra Lou attended on behalf of the HOA, along with Rick Coleman and, somewhat surprisingly, Margaret herself. I'd expected her to boycott the proceedings, but apparently her sense of duty to the community outweighed her personal animosity. The actual signing took less than 10 minutes, but the handshakes and formal acknowledgments felt like closing a chapter on a strange period of neighborhood discord.
Drop my revolver.
Sandra seemed genuinely relieved to have the legal uncertainty resolved. While Rick was already talking about getting back to normal HOA business like planning the annual block party, Margaret signed her name with sharp, precise strokes and left without saying a word. That evening, I was back in my workshop, performing routine maintenance on my tractor when Frank Martinez knocked on the open door. Got time for an old man to bend your ear? He asked, holding up a six-pack of beer. Always got time for you, Frank. How's the storm cleanup coming?
I want the gas can so I can heat up the fire too.
Still can't believe Margaret tried to have it towed. Frank settled into an old chair I kept in the corner for visitors.
No.
You know, I've been thinking...
No!
Oh? You could have really stuck it to all of us, Jesse. Could have demanded those usage fees, restricted access, made everyone's life miserable.
That goes all the work I took on that one. Okay, so...
Maybe it's not just about the places you can go, but also the people who welcome you home. It's not about living like a star, but about feeling like one.
2014, got this meat and cool.
In moments shared,
What causes the aliens always spawn on the fourth night?
Knowing what counts.
So let's first drop this off.
This is a organic. What's in it for you? High quality, organic goodness. For next level
More
nutrition
wood.
with a whole lot of benefits.
First one.
Exactly what you need.
More trees.
Every
Drop here.
You didn't. I shrugged, focusing on the hydraulic fluid I was changing. Didn't seem right. Most folks in the neighborhood are good people just trying to get by. No point in making enemies over something that was working fine until Margaret decided to flex her muscles. Frank was quiet for a minute.
An upgrade for my sack as fast as I can find.
You know what the real lesson is here? What's that? What's that? Sometimes the person who looks like they have all the power is standing on ground that belongs to others. Someone else. Frank chuckled. Margaret spent 3 years acting like she owned this neighborhood, never realizing she was walking on your property every time she stepped out her front door. I laughed, picturing Margaret's face when she first
Hello,
realized
William.
the implications of my road ownership. I never thought about it that way, but you're right. All that authority she thought she had was just borrowed, and she never knew it. Makes you wonder what other assumptions people make without checking the facts first. 2 weeks later, life in Willowbrook Estates. The sign was county clerk, eliminating any future questions about road ownership or access rights. The HOA had resumed its regular schedule of committee meetings and neighborhood improvement projects, though with noticeably less aggressive enforcement of minor violations. Margaret remained as HOA president, but her approach had changed significantly. The imperious demands and threatening notices have been replaced by polite requests and collaborative problem solving. Whether this was due to a genuine change of heart, or simply recognition that her authority had
Perfect.
limits,
Axe upgrade
I couldn't say.
achieved.
But the neighborhood was certainly more peaceful. I was out in my driveway, washing my tractor after another morning of helping neighbors with yard work, when a familiar figure approached from across the street. It was Margaret, but instead of her usual power-walking stride and clipboard, she was moving slowly, almost hesitantly. "Mr. Carter," she said, stopping at the edge of my driveway. Do you have a moment? I turned to Roblox and faced her. Sure, Margaret. What's on your mind? She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her purse strap and avoiding direct eye contact. I wanted to apologize for how I handled the situation with your tractor. I was out of line, and I let my position go to my head. The apology caught me off guard. In all our interactions, I'd never seen Margaret admit to being wrong about anything, let alone apologize for it. Made a mistake. I've been thinking about what you said, about mutual respect and being reasonable neighbors. You had every right to make things difficult for all of us, but you chose not to. That says something about the kind of person you are. Or... She paused, seeming to gather her courage for whatever came next. I also wanted to ask you something. The HOA has been discussing some improvements to the community entrance. Maybe some decorative stonework and better landscaping? Since you built the original roads, I wondered if you might be interested in providing input on the design. Now that was unexpected. You want my opinion on community improvements? More than that, actually. If you're interested, we'd like to hire you to do work. Your construction
Perfect.
company.
Both upgrades achieved.
We've gotten quotes from other contractors, but Sandra pointed out that you already know the infrastructure better than anyone else. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. 3 weeks ago, Margaret had been threatening to tow my tractor as an eyesore, and now she was asking me to improve the neighborhood's appearance. I'd be happy to take a look at what you have in mind, I said. Though I should mention that I'm mostly retired these days. I only take on projects that interest me. Would this interest you? I thought about it for a moment. The community entrance was the first thing visitors saw when they entered Willowbrook Estates. And some quality stonework and professional landscaping could really enhance the neighborhood's appeal. You know what, Margaret? I think it would. Email me the details, and I'll put together a proposal. Her face lit up with what appeared to be genuine relief. Thank you, Jessie. I really appreciate this. As she walked back toward her house, I reflected on how dramatically things had changed in just a few weeks. A property dispute that could have torn the neighborhood apart had instead become an opportunity for better communication and mutual respect. Margaret had learned that real authority comes from working with people, not trying to control them, while I discovered that sometimes you have to assert your rights to preserve the peace. The next morning brought an unexpected development. I was having coffee on
More
the back
stuff.
porch when I heard the rumble of
And find all the chests again. Bandages, perfect.
Through the trees, I
Use
could
that
see a
for
large tow truck
emergencies.
making its way toward my end of the street. For a moment, I wondered if Margaret had somehow arranged to have my tractor towed despite our recent reconciliation. But as the truck got closer, I realized it wasn't heading for my driveway at all. It was pulling up to the house 2 doors down, where the Johnsons lived. Mike Johnson was standing in his driveway next to a broken-down pickup truck that had been sitting there for weeks. I'd noticed him working on it occasionally, but apparently he'd given up on getting it running again. The tow truck driver was connecting chains to the pickup's frame, preparing to haul it away. I walked over to see if Mike needed any help. Getting rid of the old truck? Mike looked frustrated and a little embarrassed. Yeah, transmission finally gave up completely. Can't afford to fix it, and I can't afford to keep paying the tow truck to come back if it breaks down again. Where are you taking it? Salvage yard. Won't get much for it, but at least it'll
Yeah, I
be off
can't
my
head to that
driveway
one
before
just
the
yet.
HOA starts complaining about abandoned vehicles. The tow truck driver, a burly man in coveralls, looked up from his work. You're lucky I could fit you in today. Been swamped with calls ever since that story about the HOA road dispute hit the local news. That got my attention. What story? Oh, you haven't seen it? It's about homeowners associations overstepping their authority in property. Mike pulled out his phone and showed me the article.
How about hunt a couple rabbits then?
HOA president learns expensive lesson about property rights. And the story was a fairly accurate account of the dispute over my tractor and the subsequent revelation about road ownership. The reporter had apparently interviewed several residents
There's a couple
and
things
gotten
of
quotes
food.
from
Jeez,
Tom
buddy.
Bennett about the legal implications. says here that your case is being used as an example in property law classes at the State University, Mike said, scrolling through the article. Your fame is Jesse. I groaned. That's the last thing I wanted. This was supposed to be a private neighborhood matter. The tow truck driver chuckled as he finished his thing. Private matters have a way of going forward when they're interesting enough. Besides, sounds like you handled it right. Standing up for your property rights while still being fair to your neighbors. As the truck drove away,
400
with Mike's old
meters
pickup, I thought about
this
the
way, so
unintended consequences of our little dispute. The story was apparently being shared as an example of how property rights issues could surprise even experienced homeowners and HOA officials. Tom Brennan was probably loving the publicity for his practice.
For 5-star backyards, Yellowwood brand pressure-treated pine. If it doesn't have this yellow tag, you don't want it.
Buyers know the best place to go is Zanesville Honda. Shop our best selection of new Hondas. Every deal and prices. With our key guarantees and a lifetime powertrain warranty for total peace of mind. Click Zanesville Honda today.
But there was something else bothering me about the whole situation. The tow truck driver's comment about being swamped with calls suggested that our dispute had triggered similar conflicts in other neighborhoods. HOAs around the area were probably scrambling to verify their own property ownership and authority, while homeowners were questioning rules and restrictions previously accepted without question. I spent the rest of the morning researching the news coverage online. The story had indeed gone viral, with hundreds of comments from people sharing their own HOA horror stories and property
Tire.
disputes.
Mine.
Some were praising me
Do you
for
want to come
standing
back
up
here?
to an overzealous HOA, while others were criticizing me for creating unnecessary conflict over a simple tractor parking issue. The comments revealed a deep divide in how people viewed property rights and community standards. Some saw HOAs as necessary any tyrants who violated individual freedoms. The whole dispute had somehow become a symbol of that larger cultural conflict. By afternoon, reporters wanted to interview me about the case. I politely declined most of them, but eventually agreed to speak with a journalist from the local paper who seemed genuinely interested in the legal and community aspects, rather than just the conflict drama. The interesting thing about your situation, the reporter said during our phone interview, is how it demonstrates the importance of understanding property rights and legal documentation. Most homeowners assume that HOAs have clear authority over common areas, but your case shows that assumptions can be dangerous. That's probably the main lesson here, I agreed. Don't assume you know who owns what without checking the actual deeds and legal documents. And don't let disputes escalate without
Oh my
trying
god, a
to
lot of
find
coal.
reasonable
Burn
solutions
that all up
first.
pretty fast.
Do you think this will change how HOAs operate in the future? I hope it encourages more communication and less confrontation. HOAs serve an important purpose in maintaining community standards and property values, but they need to work with homeowners, not against them.
I'm gonna stop and grab
The
all
interview was
the
published
materials
the
in
following
this
week,
thing.
along with a follow-up piece about how
I don't like
other
to leave all
local
those
HOAs
materials,
were reviewing
these
their
good
own
materials
property
behind.
documentation and authority structures. Apparently, several had discovered similar ownership issues that had been overlooked for years. One HOA found that their community pool was built on land that still belonged to the original developer's family. Another discovered that a decorative fountain in their entrance was actually on city property, not HOA land. The ripple effects of our dispute were forcing communities throughout the region to clarify
I'm
their
gonna
legal
unlock this real
foundations.
quick so I can come
Margaret,
back later and
meanwhile,
grab more materials.
had thrown herself
Let's
into
see
the
where the
community
chest
entrance
is at.
project with unexpected enthusiasm.
Yep.
She'd assembled a committee of residents to review design options and had even reached out to a landscape architect for professional input. The transformation from power-hungry micromanager to collaborative community leader was remarkable to watch. I think I was trying to control things because I felt like everything was uncertain, she explained to me during one of our project meetings. When you don't really understand your authority or your legal standing, you compensate by being overly aggressive about the things you think you can control. And now? Now I know exactly what the HOA can and can't do, what our responsibilities are, and how to work within the system instead of trying to dominate. It's actually much less stressful. The entrance project became a model for how the HOA approach work. Instead of Margaret dictating and made decisions based on consensus. My role was to provide technical expertise and execute the work, but the community retained control over the design and priorities. The stonework we installed was beautiful.
Welcome in. So next 10 energy metal.
Largely, everyone was working toward the same goals instead of fighting over authority and control. 3 months after the original tractor incident, I was invited to speak at a property law seminar in the state capitol. The audience was primarily attorneys, real estate professionals, and municipal officials who dealt with property rights issues regularly. Tom, I really suggested I participate, arguing that my experience provided valuable insights for both legal professionals and property owners. The key point, I told the audience, is that legal rights and community harmony don't have to be mutually exclusive. In our case, asserting my property rights actually improved community relationships by clarifying everyone's roles and responsibilities. During the question and answer session, a municipal attorney asked about the broader implications of undocumented property ownership issues. How common do you think these situations are? And what can communities do to prevent similar disputes? Based on what I've learned since our dispute, I'd say they're more common than most people realize.
Scam, perfect.
The solution is thorough documentation and regular review of property ownership records. Don't assume that just because something has been done a certain way for years, it's necessarily legal or properly documented. An HOA official from across the state raised her hand. The advice would be to HOA boards discover they've been operating outside of legal authority. Be proactive about fixing the problem before it becomes a crisis. Work with property owners to establish clear agreements that
I
protect
don't know
everyone's
what alien
interests.
armor does, but whatever.
And remember that your authority
Whatever I
comes
can
from
find,
legal
I'm gonna take.
documentation and community consent, not from your position or title. The seminar was well received, and I found myself becoming something of an accidental expert on property rights and community governance. Law schools were using our case as a teaching example, and I received to speak at other conferences and seminars. But the
Oh my god! That was a good run too!
neighborhood had become a genuinely collaborative community where residents work together to solve problems instead of fighting over authority and control. Property values had actually increased.
She had some more people to play with.
And partly because the legal certainty created by our easement agreement eliminated concerns about future access disputes. Margaret had evolved into an effective community leader who focused on facilitating collaboration rather than imposing control. The monthly HOA meetings had become productive working sun and day. Sessions where residents planned community improvements and addressed shared concerns. Even my old tractor had found a new role.
Bored as well because I got no one to play with.
It had become a neighborhood resource that residents could borrow for their own projects. Frank Martinez used it to clear fallen trees after storms, while the Hendersons borrowed it to haul materials for their backyard. Renovation. One evening, as I was performing routine maintenance on the tractor, Margaret stopped by to discuss the next phase of community improvements. We were planning to upgrade the storm drainage system, and she wanted my input on the bond. Engineering requirements. You know, she said, watching me work. I never thanked you for handling our dispute the way you did. You could have made things much worse for all of us. We all learned something from it, I replied. I learned that sometimes you have to assert your rights to preserve the peace, and you learned that real authority comes from working with people, not trying to control them.